Hello fellow e-bike touring adventurers and potential adventurers. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the psychology of touring, in particular the barriers and fears that are part and parcel of doing long tours or even short tours, how they manifested for me and how I overcome them, all the way from when you're planning and it all seems a bit daunting, the day before you're setting out, the difficulty perhaps of trying to get a bike on a train. That can be more stressful than you'd imagine. And then the fears are wild touring itself, wild camping, nervousness around that, really nasty weather, protracted periods of bad weather, and how you deal with getting up wet and damp every morning. The forecast was promising light rain, but it got a bit heavier, and of course just at the top of the bloody mountains as well. But the view is pretty beautiful. I'll swing the camera. And then as you push towards the end of longer tours, the loneliness and homesickness that I think everybody gets, and how I've managed to deal with those and kept going. So it's the morning of day 25, maybe day 26. I think it's a Thursday. I think it's the 7th of July. Might be the 6th or the 8th. And I'm 12 kilometers out of my stealth camp at Tain. I call it a stealth camp because it wasn't really wild. It was a car park by the coast. I pretty much packed up by 6 in the morning, set up at sunset. But it struck me, with all that confusion about dates, being a good date and time to talk about the psychology of this, or the motivation aspects of how you keep going. Because I'm tired. And I'm relatively homesick. And what happens, I've discovered when I get like that, is I become a cycling machine. So yesterday I did maybe 120 or 130 kilometers. It's quite a bit of that in the morning in the pouring rain. Second biggest hill of the whole trip in the afternoon. So in my eagerness to cut about 8 kilometers out of the A9, I took a fork off the road coming across the flow, which I could see was going uphill. That's okay, I don't mind going uphill if I'm going to save myself 8 kilometers, but it turned out to be going very uphill, and I'd misread the contour lines on the map, so I thought it was only going up to 200 meters. It was actually going up to 340. I think I'm getting near the top now, but yes, I look at the road surface as well. It's a little rough. My big fear is it'll just peter out entirely at the top and I'll have to go back 15 kilometers. And then a section on the very busy A9 road in the evening, and partially my excuse for that was that my route went over a bridge on the A9, Frannick Firth, I think. I'll have to look it up, but which is about 3 kilometers long, including the approach roads. And I was quite nervous about that, so I decided the time I was doing, if I hit it in the evening, that would make it a bit easier. So that's what I did. I stopped for a pint when I came down off that big hill and had done a few kilometers of the A9, from about 4 to about 6 or 6:30, to let the traffic die down, and came on from there. But yeah, so it is hard when you start to get into this mind state, because all you can really do is cycle it off. There isn't some sort of magic cure for it, but it's also kind of, I don't know if enjoyable is the right word, but instructive or interesting or whatever, you know, like it's a battle that's more than the physical battle to keep going. The physical battle, actually, I'm finding surprisingly easy. I think the fact that after Christmas I was doing runs up to the Featherbed, which is steeper than any, well, not steeper necessarily, but is as severe and higher than any of the hills I'm actually facing here. And then that I'd done the Tralee to Galway via single route meant that I was pretty physically fit starting off, and at this stage I have a physical fitness gain from the early stage. So that aspect I'm finding easy. It's interesting, my battery life has extended quite drastically, which I presume is a mixture of fitness and also me being more in key with the bike. So the physical side is fine, but the mental side, yeah, the last couple of days has been hard. And I'm on the route home, but I still have hundreds of kilometers to go, and then haven't got a ferry booked yet. I've got to make a decision about which possible ferry route to take. The difficulty of possibly going through the north on the 11th and 12th of July, which, if you know anything about Northern Ireland, it's not something you necessarily want to do if you're from the south, particularly cycling, because cycling involves going through lots of small villages and probably running into parades left, right and centre. And then I might cycle back to Dublin on the other side. I'm a bit undecided about that as well. So I am heading home, but I'm a very long way from home. And that's the feeling I have now. I've booked into a hotel tonight, partially so I can keep this pace up. I'm planning to do 100k today, including Loch Ness, and then the big hill on the other side of Loch Ness. I think that is actually the biggest hill I'm going to face. The hotel seems to be about 3/4 of the way up it. So that'll help. That'll also mean that I set out with 2 fully charged batteries. But yeah, so that's kind of the update of where my head is. When I hit this wall, I just push through it by cycling, basically. Social media is really useful to me because it means I can talk to people back home, I can post pictures, people interact with them, people message me, all that sort of thing. I mean, this must have been very much harder in the days before you had any contact at all. Would it be easier if I was travelling with somebody? I think that's a very interesting question, because if I was travelling with somebody, how would they have reacted to yesterday when, you know, I decided I was going to do a huge distance in initially quite hard wet conditions. And then, in fact, what I also did was I did more of the A9 than my route would have indicated. The route had side turnings. I decided to stay on the A9 because it was faster, basically, and I wanted to get to where I was going. And also I was setting out without any idea of where I was actually going to stay. In fact, I only settled on the place I ended up with at that point at 5 in the evening when I was looking at things. So yeah, it would be nice to have somebody doing this with me, but we might also just fight. There might be a fair bit of "stop being ridiculous, Andrew," with probably additional words stuck in there. The experience has been fairly amazing. I mean, Scotland's beautiful. I've enjoyed the just the changing scenery and all that. Even, like, to be honest, even the bad weather afterwards, not so much at the time it's not fun, but afterwards it's kind of like it's an experience. Yes, I'm having yet another day of torrential rain, and once again have dived into a bush shelter because they're almost completely closed because it's lashing out there. Man, even the sheep across the road are hiding from it. They're all gone under the tree. I'm really happy to have got around to a load of Neolithic sites that I've been looking at for ages, in particular Callanish and Skara Brae. And I'm kind of curious about the Great Glen. I mean, it's not really a destination for me, it's more a route home. But I mean, people do go on about it a lot, and it may be that'll be something that's really positive as well. But yeah, so that's where I am. Just keeping going, keeping the head down, getting the kilometers down. I've done a hell of a lot in the last 24 hours, and more so in the next 24 hours, and I suspect probably the day after that as well. And then I'm going to have to start thinking about ferries and which direction I'm going in, and schedules and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's a beautiful morning. You can probably see that the sun's out. This road is lovely, almost no traffic on it. Some 7 months later, I quite enjoyed that protracted monologue, recorded pretty early in the morning. As I said, I think I'd left the stealth campsite there at about 6, and just spun the camera around and talked to it once I got to the hills above Tain. And it's quite interesting for the number of different factors I'm listing in that. Part of what's driving it is pretty physically exhausted and mentally exhausted. Day 27 of what was a very long trip, 130 kilometres in a lot of rain the previous day. Uncertainty that day about where I was actually going to stop. I had a fair bit of traffic fear, for lack of a better word. If you research cycling in Scotland and the NC 500 in particular, you'll find lots of horror stories from cyclists who just couldn't deal with the traffic at all. Which is interesting because it's bad, but actually it wasn't that bad. But I think that's partially because I was cunning and did it in the evening. So I'd had this big build-up of all these different pressures the previous day. I'd got to 5 o'clock that evening, didn't have a clue where I was going to stay, was having problems finding anywhere suitable, and then settled on, as I said, a car park in a sports field on the edge of a town, which actually turned out to be very nice. Lovely sunset, so it was absolutely grand, and also somebody else was camping there as well as a couple of camper vans. But that's a good example of a whole accumulation of different things that can have you feeling a bit uncertain. And the interesting thing about cycle touring in that context is you generally don't have much choice but to keep going on. You could theoretically stop by the side of the road for a while, but that's not really going to help you very much. The best thing you can do after that is doing what I did in that case, which is, as I said, right, I'm going to book a hotel for the following evening, get a good night's sleep, get a rest, a chance to charge everything. That's generally what I've done when I get a bit overwhelmed, and that works. Very straightforward. But otherwise, it's a question of you have to find the power or the sense within yourself to overcome those barriers and go, okay, I'm just going to keep cycling through those. And that's obviously what I did in that case, and as I said, have previously done. And that, I think, is one of the big achievements of the whole... Is it a hobby? Is it a sport? Don't know. The whole thing is it gets you to these situations where you've got to go inside and go, okay, I can do this. It's up to me. There isn't anybody else here. Let's push through this. And then once you've done that, you actually feel pretty good for having done it. So let's look at a couple more clips and the different fears and uncertainties they expressed in the moment. Here's another one, which is actually... It's the following day, so it's recorded the following afternoon when I had fear about the road ahead. So this is definitely one of these I pray this connects to situations. Very busy road over there, absolutely horrible, cycled on it for a while. Then there's this track here which is meant to be cyclable. They've put in a whole diversion, so my app keeps telling me I'm on the wrong place, and you can sort of see what the road is actually like. It's grand, it's a path, and I've come quite a lot of kilometres down, but if it doesn't connect through, 20-kilometre dead end. Now, okay, that's a particularly extreme example, 20-kilometre dead end along a fairly rough gravel track with steep hills on the side of a loch. Would have been quite a pain to backtrack. It was also quite funny because I stopped to talk to hikers that I met coming the other way. I didn't meet any cyclists. This is one of the things that had me worried. And the hikers were divided about 50-50 as to whether or not I'd managed to cycle through. I made it in the end. It was fine. So one of the things I would say about that is that's not an unusual experience. Particularly if you're using a routing thing that, where you're saying, it's okay to do gravel or whatever else on it. You start to go up something and then you're like, oh my God, is this actually going to go through? And it doesn't always. I have had a couple of experiences now where the road has just got too rough, or in one case actually just turned into a swamp with really kind of head height grass, which I couldn't even push a bike through, where I have had to go back. So yes, sometimes that's going to go wrong. But on the other hand, the times that it's been pretty rough and I've decided to keep going anyway have all been brilliant. They've been really, really fantastic experiences that are better than the kind of standard road cycling. So again, it's another area where it's entirely natural to be going, oh, I'm a bit apprehensive about this. But the advantage of pushing through that and going, okay, I'll give it a shot. What's the worst thing that can happen? And the answer to that is having to backtrack, which would be a pain, but isn't the end of the world. Often will then deliver something that's really, really good and interesting, and that afterwards you're going, well, I'm really glad I did that and I didn't miss out. Of course, an additional fear that's specific to e-bike touring is the fear that your battery's going to get flat when you're still a long way from anywhere. E-bikes inevitably are a good deal heavier than normal bikes. I mean, I went for a model that actually wasn't that much heavier deliberately because I knew I'd have to lift it on in enough trains. I'll talk about trains in a minute, by the way. But this next clip is early on in my Scottish tour. I say early on, I think it's about day 12, when I'm going to do what's turned out to be a much hillier distance than I'd imagined when I'd not very carefully looked at the map. I thought there was one big hill I had to do, and in fact there was 5. This is where I'm getting near the top of the 5th, and I'm aware that the next day I've got another fair distance to go to get to the ferry, and then on the other side of the ferry a fair distance to go to get to Broadfoot, where I was staying the night, and no certainty of it getting a recharge anywhere in between those. So I'm at the back of my mind going, do I need to be worrying about the battery here? I think I've done about 110 to 115 kilometres. I have 12 kilometres to go and I'm budget. I'm also going up a very steep hill at the moment, and as far as I can tell from the map it's just going to get steeper. And even with the second battery I've got to be somewhat careful to leave enough juice to get me to my destination tomorrow. I think I'm fine, but I'm always a bit nervous as I get right down to the bottom. So I've had a stop, I have a chocolate bar, because I reckon probably part of the issue is the sugar shortage. There is a town or a village about 5 kilometres away that I think might have a pub in it. And I think once I get over the crest of the hill just here, I think I'll be downhill then to that pub. So if that's the case, then it'll be grand, because I'll go in and have a pint, probably some food if they have any available, and then it's not, it's still going to be daylight for 3 hours, so I've plenty of time to make that last 12 kilometres. But yeah, definitely this was a big stretch today. And of course the problem with worrying about the battery as well is that the point at which you're worried about the battery is generally the point at which your legs are also completely shot, and you're therefore more dependent on ever. All that said, I have never run out of battery. Never once happened anywhere. The one thing you can do about that, and part of the reason I have never ran out actually, is you can get yourself a second battery, and if you are planning to do very long distances between points where you might be able to charge, your second battery will basically give you a security blanket. Now, when I was doing Scotland, I used that security blanket 4 times, so if I'd only had one battery, I probably wouldn't have run out. I'd have probably made more of an effort to find a charging point along the route, but it was nice to have that to fall back on. So that's one specific to e-bike issue that's worth considering. One aspect that can be quite stressful is the one you've very little control over, and that is where you're relying on other forms of transportation, most commonly trains, and then also, but to a much lesser extent, ferries. Trains can be difficult because although you can get bikes on them, they're often not very well set up for that at all. It's a real afterthought. In the Irish context, you can book a bike on, but until recently there were only 2 slots per train, and that meant that if you were getting on in between stops, it was often the case that somebody else would have already put their bike in there and there'd be no space for you, even if you'd booked it. That used to be something that really stressed me, but the best thing that ever happened was exactly that happened. There was no space for me to get my bike on, and it was grand. The staff were really cooperative, and we just put in my bike in the corridor, and it was fine. And so now I worry about it a lot less. there's a more general point there, I think, which is the way you overcome your fears about particular things going wrong is to have the experience of those going wrong. One of the first ever cycle tours I took was from the Peak District in England, back across North Wales to Holyhead. And I was with friends. They dropped me out of a van and I went cycling off over quite an isolated moor. And then as I was descending into a very small village, my derailleur jumped into my back wheel and got completely demolished, with everything locked together. So this was actually one of the biggest fears you could have, where you've a critical bike failure kind of in the middle of nowhere, not quite actually. This has happened right outside the village pub, which was handy. And how would you deal with such a thing? And the answer in this case, because it was such a, there was obviously no way I was going to fix this myself, was I went into the pub. I asked them if they had a list of taxi phone numbers. They did. I got my phone out. I looked up where the nearest bike shop was, and it was in a town that was about 25 kilometres away. And I rang a taxi and got them to bring me to I think it was a Premier Inn, one of those cheap hotel chains that was in that town. Then got up the next morning and wheeled the bike down to the bike shop. They fixed it up really quickly and I was back on my way. But that's the sort of, I don't know how to fix everything on my bike fear that might stop you going altogether. The reality is when it happens, providing you've enough money to get to the nearest bike shop, then you're grand. So that's key. The other thing I referred to in the Scottish monologue as I was coming out of the hills, which is probably the most difficult issue of solo cycling in particular, is loneliness. And that, you can get that quite early on. But certainly if you're on the road about a month, it starts to become quite an intense thing, because you do have conversations with people obviously, but you miss people back home and all those sort of things. Again, I think it's something you partially get around by just cycling through. But the other thing I found actually that's really good is social media and WhatsApp, and actually just staying in contact with people. And to be honest, part of the reason I do all the recording of my trips and the videos and all that is it's part of that process. Although now I'm making stuff for YouTube, initially it was very much a kind of thing I was doing for myself and for people I knew, and saying, look, here I am, here, isn't this beautiful, and having conversations with people. I think it must have been very much harder in the days before we had the complete ease you now have with connecting with people all over the world, and certainly back home. I don't think you can completely overcome that. I think part of the thing is as you go, like even if you're wild camping and living out of supermarkets all the time, maybe every now and again go to a pub, have a couple of pints, mix with people a little bit, go out of your way to chat with people, as you're travelling, and make sure you maintain some level of human contact. But certainly, long trips then, that whole thing of travelling solo, both from the point of view of loneliness, but of course the other angle is if something goes wrong, if you get sick, if you have a breakdown, all of those things, you worry about, well, will I be able to cope with that? But that's part of the purpose of telling you all these different stories that have things have gone wrong, a bit wrong, quite wrong with me, is to underline and emphasize that thing of actually, you are going to be able to deal with it. A lot of these things look like they might be very hard to deal with, but in reality they're not. Partially because you've no other choice, you just have to. So that's what you do. You make it happen, you get back on the road, you keep cycling, and you end up really enjoying it. And I think the key point is those challenges, those things that are difficult in that moment, are things that afterwards you've a sense of achievement about. They're things you've overcome, and you feel more able to overcome similar problems in the future. It's a good argument if you want to cycle around the world, though, to start with more modest, shorter tours closer to home. Get your first experiences of things going wrong. Get your first experiences of the fear of loneliness, or of being somewhere alone at night, of all of those sort of things. Get those out so you've had them, and then you're much better suited to take more and bigger adventures. So that's what it's all about.
I guess it had to happen at some point.
When I posted that clip, People had many different interpretations of what had actually happened to me. All sorts of disasters were imagined, but actually all that happened was what's in the clip. I was absolutely getting lashed on. And lashed on to the extent that my power bank flooded and I couldn't charge my phone anymore the next day. So there's another thing that can go wrong. But the final thing I wanted to end up with is that thinking about this accumulation of things that can possibly go wrong can cause you to procrastinate and just fail to make plans to do anything at all. I suffer from that at this time of year. It's February. Because generally I get to January and I go, oh, I must start planning a trip, and then I start thinking about all the things around the trip, and will I go here or will I go there? And if I'm not careful, I fail to get anything organised, and I've just gone through a period like that. So in fact, during the week, I think 2 days ago, I finally said enough and I booked a return ferry journey to Bilbao in the Basque Country, and I'm going out on the 18th of May and coming back on, I think it's the 6th of June, so I'm a little over 3 weeks there, and now I have to plan what exactly it is I'm going to do. My working concept at the moment is to cycle to Finisterre on the northwest coast, basically crossing the mountains when I arrive, going down the kind of more deserty side, actually turns into proper desert once you go further south, and then coming back along the coast. And now I have to flesh that out. I've got some pressure on me, I'm going, now it's up to me to get it together. Anyway, I hope you found that list of challenges and fears useful. I really hope it will encourage you to get out there yourself. If you have found the video useful, give it a like. That's going to help to get it out to more people. If you're intrigued by that northern, the Basque Country in northern Spain cycling adventure I'm setting off in, then do give me a follow. I'll be posting video from that and afterwards, and seek out my Instagram account, because I'm also going to be posting photos in particular there, and I do that live as I'm actually doing the cycle.